welcome everyone. I'm Joan Spurl. I am with the Literacy Cooperative, Director of Dolly Parton's Imagination Library. We are the Cuyahoga County affiliate of Dolly Parton's Imagination Library. And as I keep saying, I think it might be safe to assume all of you are enrolled or have been enrolled in the program. But again, we hope you are, and hope it actually helps with your bedtime routine. Reading, I'm sure we're going to hear from our presenter, can be helpful for relaxing and de-stressing. But wait, now what else was it? Yes. So anyway, welcome. We're so glad you're here. We are recording tonight's presentation, and we will have a presentation and then Q&A. I will help read you can put your questions in the Q&A section, please, rather than chat. And then I will read those later to Dr. Litzenburg. We will have a survey that we'll share, a survey link later that we would love for you to fill out so we know how we're doing with these healthy family programs that we've been offering. My colleague, Mercedes, has created a resource page on the Literacy Cooperative's website under the Imagination Library section. She's been sharing the link to that through emails. That takes you to the YouTube links for each of the programs in the series that have happened previously, as well as any of the resources that those presenters shared with us to share with you. So this will be up on our YouTube page in a few days, but we're really happy to have you all here live because the Q&A has been really busy in each of these presentations we've done. And we hope that you will share news about this program with others and share it with anyone you think. Anything you learned tonight, we hope you'll share with any families or associates that you think would benefit from it. So, and again, my colleague is putting links to the resource page in the chat section and etc. So anyway, I'm so grateful to have Dr. Catrina Litzenburg to do this program for us tonight, so your children can sleep well, so you can too. She is truly a sleep expert. She's associate staff for pediatric behavioral health at the Cleveland Clinic Children's Hospital. She has a Ph.D. in clinical health psychology, and she works with the pediatric sleep medicine team at Cleveland Clinic to address behavioral sleep concerns. So she is truly an expert. This is what she's working on with the toughest of cases. So I know she's going to have so much valuable information to share with us. I'm going to go off screen for her presentation, but again, welcome all. And I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Litzenburg, and then I will come back to help with the Q&A. And sometimes I chime in with Q&A myself, but
I'm going to good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm excited to be here with you all, and I hope that I can live up to the hype, but we'll see. So hold on. There we go. So we know that sleep is frequently in the news. And really, everyone knows that sleep is important. Articles often report on the negative effects of children not getting enough sleep, which is, of course, quite stressful for parents. It's also pretty common for the news to empathize with parents and the struggles that ensue when children aren't sleeping well. And then, of course, we do have lots of information out there, including things in the news about ideas for how to address or solve sleep problems. And all of this is really to highlight, what we already know, and certainly all of you for attending, a talk of this topic, is that sleep matters. Problems with it are common, and lots of people, have kind of different thoughts on different solutions and things like that. So we're going to hopefully talk about a few different things for us today. So let's talk about how much sleep children generally need. So one thing that is often discussed, but unfortunately isn't quite true, is the idea of everyone needs 8 hours of sleep. And really, what we know is that recommended sleep quantity varies across different age groups. And then even within those age groups, sleep need varies by individuals. So what we would say is the amount of sleep that your child needs is the amount that allows them to function at their best during the day. And sometimes, if you're not really certain what that might be, it can be helpful to do almost like a little study by letting them sleep in or sleep just until they wake up spontaneously on their own for about 3 days, and like as if you were like on vacation or something like that, and see how much sleep, when given the opportunity, do they get or do they take, and then how does that affect their functioning kind of that next day. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine has created some consensus recommendations for the amount of sleep that is needed to promote optimal health in children and adolescents. And this is for in a 24-hour period, and it is on a regular basis. So you can see some of the ranges are pretty wide. So let's go over kind of the differences at those different age ranges. So with infants who are 4 to 12 months of age, the recommendation is for between 12 to 16 hours of sleep in a 24-hour period. And this does include naps. And for those young kiddos, those infants, that's multiple naps a day. Children 1 to 2 years of age, we're looking at recommendations for 11 to 14 hours of sleep, with naps included as well. Our preschoolers, our 3 to 5-year-olds, it's 10 to 13 hours of sleep. And this is the age group where naps happen for some, others not, but those recommendations do include or account for naps. School-age children, 6 to 12 years old, it's 9 to 12 hours. And this is actually our age range where those children have in general, the most ability to just go all day long without sleepiness, no need for a nap, and those sorts of things. And then teenagers, kiddos, sorry, we call everybody kiddos, teenagers ages 13 to 18, it's 8 to 10 hours of sleep in a 24-hour period. Side note, for adults, the recommendation is for at least 7 hours of sleep on a regular basis. And that little on a regular basis piece is key. So let's talk about what can happen when children do not get enough sleep. So they experience a number of different consequences, including mood disturbance, which can be irritability, emotional lability, which is that real big ups and downs. Some families or folks will talk about like emotional sensitivity, crying about everything, becoming easily upset, very limited ability to regulate emotions. Also, fatigue and daytime lethargy. And this can also include increased what we call somatic complaints. So that's like experiences in our body, such as headaches, muscle pains, just kind of achiness, not feeling good. Behavior problems. So, and this doesn't necessarily have to reach the level of like a diagnosis or a disorder, but if we're not getting enough sleep, we can have more hyperactivity, non-compliance, so not following directions, oppositional behavior, things of that nature. And it's interesting sometimes when we talk about hyperactivity with not getting enough sleep, that can feel sort of contradictory for folks, but certainly for children and just the way that their brains work, if they're not getting enough sleep, they can actually be overly active and just have that inability to sort of stay still. And then academic problems as well. So, and part of this is because we know that sleep is needed to remember what we learn, to organize our thoughts, and to work accurately and efficiently, and then to be creative and to problem solve and to do all of those sort of executive functioning tasks, if you've heard of that term before. So when children don't get enough sleep, they may experience problems with memory, attention, concentration, decision making, problem solving. And then unfortunately, we can also have, and that can be seen in the cognitive impairment that's listed there. And then they may also experience those academic problems that can come from chronic tardiness, as well as school failure that might be associated with excessive daytime sleepiness, whether that includes falling asleep in school, or just really not having the ability to kind of follow through on all of the things that academics really require. And I know that there's something in the chat. If it's something I need to address, feel free to stop me, and I totally will. So let's discuss some healthy sleep habits. And the reason that we really want to talk about habits and that piece is really to emphasize a few things. One is the chronic nature of things, and that can be because if we don't sort of fix or address or do something about sleep now, if it is a problem, it's something that can unfortunately continue to be a problem over time. And then it's also about health promotion or prevention. So there are things that you can kind of instill in your children or prioritize in your family to help it make it so that they're likely to be healthy sleepers now and in the future. So a consistent sleep-wake pattern is a really big part of healthy sleep habits. And so that really just means going to bed at about the same time and waking up at about the same time. So some of the ways that we can do this or that we can be successful involves considering several factors. So first, it's arranging your child's schedule such that you're able to maintain a consistent bedtime and wake time, which includes on the weekends. We just, are coming at the end of summer. And so certainly there's, usually more variation in the summer months and vacations and things like that. But finding what works for your family in terms of, kind of a healthy schedule. And then you can see light there. So in terms of light, we want to limit light exposure in the evening. So as we're sort of preparing for sleep or, the hours after dinner, around dinner, and in the night. And that includes light from electronics like TV, tablet, phones, things of that nature. And that is because if you've heard of melatonin, so bright light actually suppresses the release of melatonin, which is a sleep promoting hormone that helps with that consistent sort of preparing for sleep. Physical activity. So we do in general want to avoid physical activity too close to bedtime. It is usually recommended to avoid physical exertion about 3 hours before bedtime to allow enough time for the child to settle down and get into bed at a reasonable level of activation. And I do want to just mention that all of this is guidelines, right? So I say 3 hours before bed, recognizing that after school activities, practices, games, things like that, if children are participating in those are likely going to run into that 3 hours. And so that's just one of the recommendations. Maybe you're not able to do that one, but you stress or focus on maybe another one or things like that. So it's really kind of considering all of these factors as a whole and then deciding, okay, this we really need to focus on, or this is maybe something that we're going to be a little bit less stringent on. And those are okay. And it's also about how well your child is sleeping anyway. Meals. So in terms of meals, it is best to avoid a large meal close to bedtime. But it is helpful to eat at consistent meal times throughout the day, especially with breakfast. And then naps. So if your child is at the appropriate age for naps, then naps should be timed early enough in the afternoon to allow the child to accumulate an adequate sleep pressure by bedtime. And that essentially just means that they're going to be tired enough to be able to fall asleep at that bedtime that you've set for them. So, and then thinking about what you can do to create a good sleep environment for your child. And one of the main things is to maintain a sleep environment that is as consistent as possible. That's our cookie cutters over there. So what that means is they sleep in the same place in about the same conditions every night. Again, recognizing there are families where a child, stays at more than one home. There might be families where a child is, staying late into the night and then needing to go somewhere else for daycare or work purposes and things like that. So this is not meant to say that if you're not able to do, exactly this every single night, that your child isn't going to be able to sleep well, or that's, unhealthy. It's just thinking about what are the most consistent things that I can do and how can I put this in place, in sort of the best way possible for my child under our family's circumstances. So the bedroom should be dark with the exception of a nightlight as needed. Ideally, we do think about nightlights or lights that are specifically designed to be like nightlights and a smaller, not too bright. Things have gotten pretty fancy with LED lights and projectors and things like that. So sometimes it's just, again, thinking about on a whole your child's room and knowing that darkness is a sleep promoting sort of environment and finding that balance. And then cool. So in general, the recommendation is for less than 75 degrees Fahrenheit. And that is just because our body temperature actually decreases a little bit when we're falling asleep and going to sleep. And so having a somewhat cooler sleep environment can promote sleep or help prepare for sleep. And if it's too hot, that can be something that can just make it a little bit more challenging or more difficult for us to fall asleep. If the sound there that's listed, so that's kind of going with the like waves idea, or if folks use music or white noise or sound machines, those can actually be really healthy and helpful to drown out what's called ambient noise, right? So little household sounds that might happen, throughout the house, or especially if your child is going to sleep earlier and there's other folks in the home, understandably, who are still awake. And if we turn it on at bedtime every night, that can actually become a healthy sleep onset association, so that the child learns to fall asleep or associate sleep with that sound. The caveat is that you just want to then leave it on all night. So we can get into a little bit of a trickiness when we have those things on a timer that then turns off at some point. Excuse me. And the reason is that because we all wake up in the middle of the night at the end of every sleep cycle, which is normal, healthy, and expected. And so if your child has learned to fall asleep with that sound machine on, and then they wake up and it's no longer on, that can be disruptive or a barrier to them sort of returning back to sleep. And then again, ideally, not always possible, it is best or most helpful to set the sleep environment as a location where items and activities that are associated with wakefulness, such as homework, phones, electronics, worrying, things like that, are minimized. So as much as possible, if there's something that really activates your child, or is going to be likely to keep them awake, better to have that be outside of their bedroom. I do sometimes talk to families about, yes, they've got a bedroom and their toys are in there, and that's awesome. Can we put them in like bins, right, that are not clear so they can see them, and things where they can't get access to them, and things like that. Some of that can be actually pretty helpful, or just kind of like a prevention, or hopefully an easy kind of thing. So let's talk a little bit about some barriers or things that can get in the way of sleep. So caffeine, I know I put a coffee thing there, and many children don't drink coffee. Some do, or at least try to, but lots of chocolate. So there is a little bit of caffeine in chocolate. Energy drinks, pop, soda can certainly be a barrier to being able to fall asleep. There is sort of a general rule out there of not to ingest or to consume caffeine products for at least 4 hours prior to sleep. That can really vary depending on sort of the person or the individual. But the thing to be mindful of is just that like if you're having something at dinner, it's probably going to impact, if not falling asleep, then certainly the quality of sleep. And so trying to either move that up, or just another thing to kind of pay attention to. Some medications, such as stimulants for ADHD, can interfere with sleep. Generally speaking, if this is a factor for you, then I would recommend discussing the concern with the person prescribing the medication, because there are certainly things that can be done to try to minimize that interference. And so just something to kind of be mindful of or aware of that possibility. Electronics, so they are a significant barrier for a few reasons, most of which we've alluded to, or at least talked about a little bit. So one is the bright light, as well as the stimulating nature of them, especially so video games and things that are handheld that the child can then sort of move or like use themselves, that just provides such a stimulation that is just counterintuitive or counterproductive to sleep. Hunger. So meals are tricky because I told you before, don't have a big meal before dinner or before bed. And now I'm saying like hunger is a barrier to sleep. So it's true that hunger can wake us up from sleep or can keep us from sleeping well. So generally, kind of what we talk about is potentially adding a small healthy bedtime snack to, a bedtime routine, similar to what Joan was talking about a little bit. Reading books, having a snack. Some families will do bath. That's where actually this excitement one comes in, because for some kids, baths can be pretty calming and relaxing and totally works. And other kids are like, oh, excuse me, are like, it's a very exciting or sometimes just like tense activity. And so that's where it's really important to know what the consideration is, and then to think about how that affects your child specifically. So thinking about vigorous play, conflicts with family, just other activities that might excite your child are things that we, sort of want to try to avoid before bed. So those are some just very basic general recommendations for healthy sleep. Now, certainly if you are interested in more resources, you can certainly, ask your pediatrician, getting input from hopefully that they are someone that you trust and have a relationship with. Actually, when I'm not working with the pediatric sleep disorders team, I'm actually in primary care. And so I really value that relationship. The Pediatric Sleep Council. So that is babysleep.com. This website is one of the most helpful ones that I do often recommend to families. And part of the reason is because they have videos where they give information, but then they also split things up by age group. And I think it's up to like 3 or 4. And part of the reason that they do it, even month by month, is because we just know during that time your baby is developing so much that there can truly be a difference, kind of from 1 month to the next. And so I recommend that. The Society of Behavioral Sleep Medicine. So these are folks who are similar to me, who have specifically have training or interest in the behavioral parts of sleep. And they've got, you could look and find a provider, again, if you were having more trouble or more difficulties, or just, wanted to get more information, as well as the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. And this sleepeducation.org, that is actually their patient facing, or their like their general audience facing piece. And so one of the things that's really nice is that knowing the accuracy and being confident and comfortable, just saying that that's some good stuff that they're putting out there. And that is the initial kind of piece.
Great. Great. So I just want to let people know, if you signed on late, we are recording this and it will be on our YouTube channel. So stick around. But if you missed things, you can go back and see the first part, because she did Dr. Litzenburg did just share at the beginning about, what are things that help produce good sleep habits, or that foster good sleep, versus those barriers or obstacles. And we do have a couple questions. You can put your questions in the Q&A section, please. So those are coming in. And I'm gonna just ask one more time for you to reiterate, because I know this is a recommendation, but it's something that I don't think is as widely known as might be helpful, is to not have screens, TVs, computers, phones, electronics in a child's bedroom. Ideally, we don't even have them in our own adult bedrooms, but maybe there's a place where the family stores their devices for the night. Do you have recommendations for how to make that happen?
Yeah, so I agree with you. So it certainly is a recommendation. I try to give families additional information and more context to some of that, which is part of why we talk about, bright light and the excitement and things like that, like difficulty with like stimulating activities. And part of that is just because I think if we do a blanket no TV in the bedroom, I think we can tend to get some pushback, right? Understandably so. So I think it's about recognizing that those are barriers to sleep, and that often those can be one of the first things that might be easily addressed for you. And so thinking about how can we kind of reduce this and still be successful, or to have it be possible. And part of it is that we also know that adults certainly have experiences of learning to fall asleep with the TV on and having that be a sleep onset association, similar to what I had mentioned earlier. And that's just thinking about, is that a healthy sleep habit? Is that something that you want your child to also develop, or do we want to try and do something different for them while they're young and they have the opportunity to sort of develop really good healthy habits, if that makes sense.
Right. So I'll just start reading some of the questions aloud. One parent is curious about your take on melatonin supplements to help a child relax and fall asleep. I've heard mixed things about their safety among children, she said.
Yeah, so that's a question that we get often. So I will say that as a psychologist, I do not prescribe medication, including melatonin, which I know is available over the counter and things like that. So the actual like neurological piece of it, I defer to my physician colleagues. What I say from my standpoint is, if melatonin is the only thing that you're doing, you're certainly not going to be successful, right? So melatonin is not something that can put a child to sleep. They can certainly still be running around and not successful at bedtime. I know that there are recommendations, and there's some ways that my colleagues certainly are able to safely recommend it as part of a larger sort of plan for what they're addressing for our kiddos.
So I guess first you would want to make sure you have all these other pieces in place.
Yeah.
Yeah, maximize those. So someone else asked, what for a 3-month-old, what would you recommend the room temperature be during the winter time, when it's cold outside? Because I know cold rooms, I know I can't fall asleep when I'm too cold. But I know during the summer, I do still like it to be not hot, but varies. So
Yeah, so that's where, certainly I think my understanding is like in general, the recommendation for like young kids like that is like just a little bit warmer than you are, right? But at 3 months old, we are also still thinking about that safe sleep part of things. So that's a crib that is empty of blankets and things like that. So often it's thinking about a sleep sack that can be they have warmer ones for the winter and that sort of thing as well. So if you are comfortable with the temperature and that's good for you to fall asleep, then I would say that it's going to work for your child as well.
I know that my son, we were going to have him sleep in a crib in our bedroom when he was little and when he was a baby and newborn, and our room was cold. And the room that he was in with his crib was the warmest room. So he actually, he just needed to be, he couldn't sleep in our room. It became clear that the temperature was actually the issue. And he ended up sleeping outside our room in his own crib sooner, like
Gotcha.
away from us than we had first planned. We had one of those little cribs that were going to be in our
Mhm.
room. Um,
And so I
so
think what
anyway,
I would say is what's really good is to just think critically about those things. I've definitely had families where, they had an AC where it was like going right at the kid and it was then too cold. And so they figured out a way to aim it up. And so it's about finding that balance and then just being thoughtful about, oh, this is a factor that could impact sleep,
mhm.
whether it's too hot, too cold, and just trying to find, again, what kind of fits well to promote sleep as much as possible.
And another question, how far in advance should I limit light or electronics before sleep? I think you had said 3 hours, but
Yeah, so that is where we want you to be as setting yourself up for success. So ideally, in an ideal world, we're thinking about 3 hours, right? But there's also something to be said for, sometimes families value certain pieces of that. But could you replace it with a different activity, something else that you value as a family? Certainly, reading being one of them. And whenever I'm asking questions about reading, I'm asking, is that in an actual book on a tablet? Like, because that can play a role with the light part of it too. So that's 3 hours is the big thing. Often we're saying at least an hour. If your child is sleeping well, then what you're doing might be fine. If your child is having some sleep difficulties and you're realizing they're having electronics, up to an hour before bed, then that might be something that you try moving back a little bit to see if that will help with their healthy sleep.
yeah, and I just always feel anyone who has been on these presentations or heard me speak before, I forgot to say to folks that I'm a former kindergarten teacher and preschool and um, Head Start teacher. I taught many years in the Chicago area. And so I've cared about children and family well-being for 30 years. I've been in the field, but we know that the American Academy of Pediatrics says no screen time before the age of 2, except like with a Zoom family interaction, that kind of thing can be okay. And then to limit it to no more than 2 hours a day, and that's pretty much for the rest of our lives of total screen time. That's computer, video game, TV, tablet, whatever. No more than 2 hours total for children, because if they're doing more than that, it's supplanting the activities that are actually really more healthful, beneficial, and brain building for them. We know there's more and more research coming out that screen time is ineffective at building young children's brains. Screens are. So like real books, that's one reason we love Imagination Library and getting real books in the hands of children, because they're real interactions with real objects, real people. Real books are what's most beneficial for brain development. So I just feel like I needed to put that little note in.
Thank you.
So use it as a last resort when you can, and then choose the quality carefully. So I think we have a couple that are kind of a similar theme. What to do about when a toddler is waking up frequently and ultimately keeps ending up in your bed. There's another that was, should I wait until it is dark outside to put my toddler to bed? He's 3.5 and continues to run out of bed and fight getting under the covers. Should he be put down later? And then another that had a question that ended up in the chat was a mother who I think she said that only let's see. Oops, I see some of the questions ended up in the chat. So a child needs mom and only mom to fall asleep or run out of the room and wake in the middle of the night if she's not there. And then I'll have to try to get back to some of these.
So
and then, yeah, hopefully we'll get to all these questions, but if not, we have those resources to go to.
For sure.
And for the harder, more persistent problems, that's when you go get help from your practitioner, your medical provider, and
real specific one-on-one kind of stuff. So what I would say is, so once your kiddos outgrow the crib, and I do advocate for as long as it is safe, they're not crawling out and, you're not worried they're going to hurt themselves. It is okay to keep them in the crib because then they're not able to do the coming out and doing all of that stuff. But once we're transitioning into like a toddler bed or a different bed, we do see sort of a little bit of a burst in some, or spike in some sleep difficulties. That's also usually at the age where developmentally kids start asking a lot more questions. They're then thinking, a little bit more about like monsters and I'm scared of the dark. And just because their brains are just telling them that there's so much more things to think about and wonder about. So 3, 4, 5 years of age is very common, these specific difficulties. So when we're talking about frequent night wakings, one thing that I would say is it's common, normal, healthy, and expected to wake up at the end of every sleep cycle. The length of sleep cycles vary, but in general, they're 90 minutes to 2 hours long. So every 2 hours-ish, we expect that your child and us are waking up. It's just that healthy sleepers roll over and go right back to sleep. Often what we see is the child will wake up and go back to sleep at that beginning of the earlier chunk in the night because they have enough sleep pressure or they're still tired enough to sort of do it more quickly. But then we get into like the 2, 3, those later times in the night or the morning when they're not as tired and they're more able to realize, okay, mom is no longer here, or maybe, I want to go check in on something else, or, something like that. And that's when they might be coming, kind of into your room a little bit more. So one of the first things to check is it more often than we would expect? Then that might be something that we need to check out for maybe like an organic sleep difficulty, sleep apnea, restless legs. There's all kinds of things like that could potentially be happening that we just want to kind of rule out and check on. But then also recognizing that sleep is a behavior, it's a skill, it's something that we have to set a limit or an expectation on. And it's not something that children find fun or exciting. Most of them would rather be doing something else. Most of them think that they're missing out on something. And so they're going to push that limit to find out a way, how am I going to get them to let me sleep in their bed, or how am I going to get this bedtime delayed or extended? And so the more you decide, I'm not going to answer all these questions, or, I'm just going to remind you, no, nobody, it's time for bed. The more likely you are to be successful in sort of enforcing that, if that makes sense. The question about a later bedtime because it's not dark out. So that one is a tricky one. And your smart kids will be like, no, mommy, it's not dark out. Like, it's still time for us to be up. So unfortunately, what we know is that overly tired children are harder to get to sleep. They will fight sleep harder. They'll be, more irritable, more, sometimes more active, right? So we actually don't want to necessarily make bedtime later, because then they're going to be more tired. So you want to find this window of where if you're showing you signs that they're tired, you actually want to try and get them in bed just a little bit before those signs happen. Because if you're waiting until after that, then you've already missed your main opportunity of when it would have been easiest to get them to sleep. So when it gets dark at 9 or 9:30, what I actually recommend is, unfortunately, we have to start like faking that it's dark, closing blinds, dimming lights, things like that, and just letting the child know that it is actually bedtime, and that is what we're going to do. And they actually also have preschool alarm clocks that can help your kids who don't know how to tell time yet, and they wouldn't be expected to know, okay, this is what is like, I'm expected to be in bed, and then this is when it's okay to be awake, and things like that. They've got a ton of different ones, but essentially they all do the same thing. The concept is the same.
Yeah, we've got a lot of specific, like individual specific questions, but kind of related. And I just, again, will say, as an early childhood educator, children want limits set with them. They need you to be the adults and to set limits. It's okay to say no, and explain. To the degree you can explain the whys sometimes, but here you'll see why I'm getting to this. Let's see. Someone has a 5-year-old who in the last 3 months has had a very hard time falling asleep. Takes 30 to 60 minutes. He's restless, doesn't want to stop playing. His brain is active. He can't stop ideating, so wants advice. I'm going to read a few at a time in case there's sort of others wanting. I'm going to wait to do the babies. There's some who have, it sounds like, well, I think one who said they've tried everything to get their daughter to fall asleep independently. It might not be a baby. Ferber method, full-blown cry it out, sitting by the door. She hyperventilates, even hits her head. It's very stressful. I'm just gonna come back to one. I already covered that one. 6-year-old who, once she falls asleep, is okay, but won't do it with one of them in the room, which is a bad habit they've indulged in since she was a baby. Takes her an hour or more for her to wind down once she's in bed. Is there any hope for us? They said, and we know why this is such a hard issue, because we want all of you to get your sleep. And I'm going to go back to some of the others. So let's try those for now.
So one of the things that I heard earlier that is sounding relevant to some of these is the sleep onset association. So this can sort of be thought of as like a bedtime checklist. So this is like, these are the things that I need in place in order to fall asleep. And a healthy sort of not problematic sleep onset associations are the ones that you or your child can get on their own that don't require another person to give them to them. And I share with people that one of mine is socks. I cannot sleep without socks on. A lot of people think that's very strange and weird, but it's my thing. But it's really easy, right? I'm an adult. I can just get some socks, put them on my feet, and it's fine. But for other children or for other people, sometimes their sleep onset associations include things like rocking, holding, rubbing head, something where someone said like they need mom, right? Mom physically being there. Where I mentioned earlier about your sound machine, if that's going to be on, we want it on all of the time. Any of those things that your child needs at the beginning of the night in order to fall asleep, they're going to need in the middle of the night when they wake up. Often what I hear from parents is, I love rocking them to sleep. I love cuddling with them at bedtime. And I love that you love that. But what that means is that you're then signing up to do that when they wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, because you're on their checklist. That's what they need in order to go back to sleep. So if you're not okay with doing that when they wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, which I wouldn't expect that you always would because you also need sleep, then we need to get you off that list at bedtime. And that's where you've heard drowsy but awake, or I'm going to put you down and we're going to do some of these activities beforehand, but then you're going to actually fall asleep on your own independently, or I'm going to give you a lovey, a stuffed animal every time, or you're going to sleep with mommy's shirt, right? That smells like me, or my pillow, or, things like that, which are not problematic because they can get those things on their own, but can kind of help with that feeling of attachment, if that makes sense.
And those objects can be introduced at what age? Because if they're
they can be introduced after a year of age, depending on what you're feeling in terms of that safe sleep. It's a year and under that we're most concerned about having everything out of the crib.
Yeah, I think those are some good ideas. And again, there's help to be had in people like Dr. Litzenburg too. So at your pediatrics practices. So I'm hoping some of that helps with some of those. Someone talked down about a genetic mutation, neurophagism, delayed circadian rhythms, CRY1. This parent has that textbook diagnosis and thinks her little one might be a night owl. I don't know.
Okay. So to be honest with you, am not familiar with the genetic mutation. I certainly do know about circadian rhythms and being a night owl. So that is something that I would recommend to be evaluated and treated by a sleep disorders specialist, and that would be on the physician side typically. And part of that is, like you likely already know, is there's things where we want to think about, kind of the chrombiotics and really potentially moving that preferred sleep to be more in line with social expectations, like school and work and those sorts of things. And there's pretty effective ways that physicians can help make that happen. And then people like me help with, light exposure, because light tells us it's time to be awake. Dark helps us to prepare for sleep, as well as consistent meal times. That's another thing that helps set our circadian rhythm. So that whole consistent sleep wake pattern, really that's just super duper important for folks who might have circadian rhythm disorders or disturbances there. Our children with autism also tend to have some some trickiness with, circadian rhythm at times, and tend to be, maybe like an early morning awakening as well. And so that's something that would also be recommended to be checked out or further evaluated.
And one mom says she has children of different ages that share a room. Is there anything I can do to help them all get the recommended amount of sleep and not keep each other awake? Because maybe they need different amounts. So
Yes. So this is where, Joan, where you were talking about the limit setting, and I don't know how far apart these children are in their ages, but where I would actually say it's okay to let them know that everything isn't going to feel exactly fair. And what I mean by that is, like, for example, let's say you've got an 8-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 2-year-old, right? Their sleep needs are different, as well as when we think they're going to actually fall asleep. So I would actually say your 8-year-old can stay up later and actually not go into the room until a time that fits for them. But I forget how old I made them, your 5-year-old is probably going to protest about that, right? But sort of saying, we're worried about you. This is what you're doing. So-and-so is older, and that's just the way it kind of is. This is probably a situation where I would be thinking about putting a white noise or a sound machine, in that room, so that when the kiddo is coming in, or, things like that, that would hopefully not be as disruptive. And then we can also, just like anything else, the behaviors that we give attention to are the behaviors that we're going to see more often. And so what that can mean is, if we want to reinforce sleep promoting behavior, which is like, you're in your bed, you're quiet, then when they're doing that, we are potentially allowing, for maybe a reward in the morning, or we're kind of letting people know that that's what you're expecting. And so when a child is doing that versus a child who isn't, we want to give the child who is doing it kind of that praise and that reinforcement.
Yeah. Catch them being good, positive reinforcement for what you want to see. As a teacher, I can tell you, I had to, when children who were exhibiting challenging behaviors, or we were having issues, I had the opportunity for years where I worked to have someone come in and observe me and my team with that child, and see what was going on. And inevitably I needed to change my behavior, because I was sort of giving attention to the behavior that we didn't want to see, and I had to reverse it. I had to give the attention, try to downplay that, and then give the attention to every time they were doing something I wanted to see, really making a big deal of it. And eventually you would get into a pattern where you didn't have to be quite so dramatic that way.
Yep. You can wean it a little bit.
Someone asked about a child who sleeps with their mouth open. Is this a problem?
So if a child sleeps with their mouth open, it could be a sign that there's maybe some blockage or some difficulty with their airway. And so I would recommend, mentioning it to a pediatrician or something like that, because that can impact the quality of their sleep. And if we're not getting a good quality of sleep, then what that can mean is that even if you get them the amount of sleep that they need, they still might not do as well. They might not be at their optimal. So it doesn't have to be a problem, but it's worth checking.
And then one parent said advice she's gotten from family and friends is not to keep the sleep environment completely quiet or pitch black for my infant, so he doesn't wake so easily during nap time, and I can have more time to myself to do chores or whatever around the house while he's sleeping. Do you agree with this?
I do. Part of it is, so I agree with the concept. And I think what the concept is, some folks will create this space and then they're like tiptoeing around, right? And it's like, don't do anything. We might possibly, wake the baby. And that makes sense because you're just trying to get everybody some sleep. But unfortunately, what that can do is it can just make it where they don't learn that they can, just stay asleep. So not being quite so sensitive can train them to you're just sleeping through all of this. Of course, naps being the main part because you're awake and doing things during that time. The only thing that I might not fully agree with is I would say it's still okay to have it be dark. So maybe just doing the dark part, but using like maybe a sound machine or something like that and still living your life. One thing that we can consider that some folks do is they'll put a sound machine in like each bedroom, right? So if you've got multiple bedrooms, multiple kids sleeping at different times, that kind of thing can, again, it just helps drown out some of that noise. And what they learn is they learn to fall asleep to that sound, which is okay and something that you can travel with or, whatever, there's not a problem there. And then you are able to, move about your house and do whatever you want to do.
Someone, it sounds like for this one, has a 7-year-old with sleep anxiety. You get so upset about the chance of not falling asleep that she throws up several times a week. So that sounds, and she's at a loss. So it sounds like, again, seeking more help is probably going to be what you would want to do from your,
Probably.
from,
Yeah. So in general, what we think about for things like that is checking in to make sure that if like anxiety or behavior difficulties or, things like that is present during the day or in other areas, then we want to specifically come up with a plan that also addresses that. And part of the reason for it is because if we have separation anxiety, for example, we have difficulty being apart from our primary caregivers during the day, it's going to be very difficult to do that at nighttime as well. Nighttime and bedtime is just an extra challenging time. Everybody's tired, people are stressed, and it's just, it's harder. And so often we'll talk about putting a plan in place so that folks can be successful at daytime, either first or simultaneously. And again, I don't want to assume because it is possible that anxiety can be isolated to sleep and bedtime, but it would just be a good idea for us to check and make sure, do a little, kind of investigation.
Yes, and I think, and I'm not sure, someone has a newborn and is asking for advice on getting through the witching hour of how do we know the difference between our newborn is tired or hungry. And then I'm not sure, there's another question about how to switch back to nighttime sleeping, and I'm not sure how to interpret that. But I know a lot of people are, have already signed off. They probably got the information that they needed. They have resources to go to with the website you shared. But and we're almost done out of our time. But I want to thank everyone for coming, and thank you, Dr. Litzenburg. But I'll let you answer those last two things. But just knowing that some people are a lot of people have already signed off, and there's a link to our survey in the chat, which we'll probably send out to folks afterwards as well. So yes, and that's going into the chat again. So maybe, I don't know, hopefully the people with the newborn are still on. And the other person about night sleep, I'm not sure, maybe someone's sleeping too much during the day and not enough during the night.
Sure. So one thing that we'll say is less than 3 months of age, we generally don't expect that infants have the ability to self-soothe. So that is where it's sort of an expectation of we're responding to some sort of need. And I can appreciate that it's trying to figure out, is it the the tired, the hungry, the bathroom, like which one of it is it? And so sometimes you're sort of just trying them all, right? And so from a sleep perspective, it's about creating the opportunity and the circumstances where if you've checked the sleep or the other ones, then sort of offering sleep as an option, but knowing that that is going to involve comforting because they don't yet know how to do that, and we wouldn't expect them to. I don't know for sure what the daytime nighttime thing is,
So
but
I just got another note from them. So this is someone who's actually seen you and worked with
oh,
you,
okay.
and their child stays up all night and sleeps during the day. They've seen you about it. It's changed back to normal sleep, but now, so it must have changed back to normal, but now she's back to being a night owl. So that's,
Mhm.
I'm guessing you're going to tell them to call you or make an appointment.
I'm gonna say, yeah, come on back and let's figure it out. But for a general recommendation, I would say for us to think about what happened where we were successful, going back to those consistent sleep wake pattern schedule times, and just sort of investigating, did we become more lax in one or more of those things? And is this a situation where we need to just be a little bit more strict or stringent on those, the meals, the lights, the physical activity, all of those things, in order to kind of make it more likely that we can get back in tune. And often, and obviously I don't know the age of folks because I didn't look, but summer is just a really tricky time. A lot of people are off and finding that they need to get kind of back on their schedule.
Oh, they said there's a change in her school schedule. Maybe she's switching to a
Yeah,
new school. Maybe she's scared. So,
that could
but
be
I
part of
just,
it.
I, two more questions had come in right at 8. So, if a 4-year-old snores, is that a worry? Grandpa has sleep apnea. Um, and then, so I'll let you do that one. And then if you're
Mhm.
willing to stay on for a few minutes for this last one, and then that will be our last question.
Sure. So I would say that if a 4-year-old is snoring, I would mention it to your pediatrician, because in general that can be a sign that, again, that there's something kind of going on. And then you're right on in that you're thinking, hey, is this a possibility of a sleep apnea piece? So they can do, kind of a quick assessment as well as a physical exam to see if there's some things that they want to try before, or maybe it's not necessary before recommending further assessment.
Great. And then people said, is there a link where I can watch this recording? We are recording it. We will be sharing it within a few days and sending out the link. It'll be on the Literacy Cooperative's YouTube channel. And then my colleague always shares it out afterwards as well, along with the survey link. So I know a lot of your questions are very specific to your child. So and we were going to end at 8, so I'm just gonna, again, someone is asking about how to get out of a room without the toddler chasing her. She uses the excuse she needs to use the bathroom and wants to let the door left open but will not fall asleep. So I don't know if that's a toddler that can be put back in a crib or I'm
Yeah, so I would say, I know we heard a couple of those. So that the Pediatric Sleep Council, the babysleep.com, it specifically actually addresses some of those toddler difficulties with like these specific concerns. And then the one family who had mentioned Ferber and cried out and it sounded like floating chair, those are things that can also get discussed a little bit through the sleep council. So I would recommend kind of
looking into those
checking it out.
resources. Yeah.
And then in addition to that, if you're reading that and you're like, okay, this describes my concern or my problem, but I don't feel confident or comfortable in implementing it or doing that for my child, certainly, reach out and we can see about, kind of having some help with some of that on an individual basis, probably.
All right. So thank you so much again. Half the people signed up, but we still had half of them, around half people still on holdouts, trying to get every last bit of information. So thank you so much. I do hope that I wish all of you luck with all of this. I know how important it is. And I again want to thank you for sharing your expertise with us.